Rule number 88. In indirect speech, a real question has a verb in the subjunctive mood, while a rhetorical question uses an infinitive. We are currently exploring indirect speech in all of its various forms, and this rule explores the interaction of questions with indirect speech. I'm going to break this down into two main parts: the concept of indirect questions first, and then questions in an extended indirect speech, like where an author has a whole paragraph of speech relayed indirectly, and there are some questions mixed in with the regular indirect statements. So first, indirect questions. And these are questions relayed indirectly, like, you don't know what I'm thinking. Here we have a statement, and the real action is conveyed by the you don't know, that has embedded in it a question. What am I thinking? But note that it's not relayed as a question. This is a statement. In Latin, nescis quid sentiam. The verb of our question, sentiam, is in the present subjunctive, and you'll almost always find the indirect question itself introduced by a question word, here quid, with the whole question itself introduced by a word relating to asking, here the nescis. Note that as a direct question, what am I thinking, would be quid sentio. Our subjunctive verb becomes an indicative when the question more or less expects an answer. Here's another simple one. Dixit quis esset. He said who he was. Our indirect question begins with our question word quis and has a verb in the imperfect subjunctive esset. One more from Virgil. Quaerere constituit qui locum teneant homines neferae. He decides to find out who owns this place, whether men or beasts. Our interrogative word is quaerere, and the qui is our question word, with teneant in the present subjunctive. You can imagine Aeneas thinking to himself, who owns this place? But our narrator relays that thought indirectly as Aeneas sets off on his journey. But what if you have a long set of consecutive phrases that you want to relay using indirect speech, as usually happens in Latin? The direct speech has a mixture of questions and statements in it, like te video intrantem villa meam, quid vis, cur venis, volo te abire. I see you as you enter my house. What do you want? Why are you coming? I want you to leave. Pretty standard, so let's put this into the mouth of a woman named Claudia. Claudia dixit, Claudia said. Our English would be something like, Claudia said that she saw him entering her house. What did he want? Why did he come? She said that he wanted him to leave. Those questions, by the way, are hard to relay in a standard indirect way in English. So the first thing we need to do is to change the main verbs of our statements, not the questions, into infinitives. And both of these are present tense verbs in direct speech, so they become present infinitives. And they need subjects too, since they were both first-person verbs. Claudia is our third-person subject, so we use se to show that it's the same as the subject of our dixit. Our meam also needs to become soam, again to reflect our third person. And the second person pronouns te become the third person eum, and note the difference between using se, same as the subject, and eum, different from the subject. Finally, we have our questions. So we will put these real questions, because Claudia is asking them, expecting an answer, into the subjunctive. And the imperfect works because our head verb dixit is in the perfect tense. Go back and review the idea of sequence of tenses, Rule 71, if you need a reminder that a past tense main verb only uses verbs in the imperfect or pluperfect subjunctive. So we have quid vellet, cur veniret. Caesar, among many other ancient writers, loves to use extended indirect statement for relaying speeches from his characters, and you'll often find direct questions relayed in indirect speech with the subjunctive. Here's a short example after Ariovistus sees two Romans sent by Caesar to him. Ariovistus, with his own army right there, conclamavit quid ad se venirent. Ariovistus shouted, and here comes the direct question in indirect speech, why did they come to him? I suppose the direct question is more like, why are you coming to me? Quid ad me venitis? But what if the question is rhetorical? Now that's a different thing. And the fact that the question implies its own answer makes it less of a question and more of a statement. and so we use an infinitive rather than a subjunctive verb. Earlier in the same book, Caesar is speaking to the Helvetian ambassadors. Caesar ita respondit. Caesar responded in this way, and he goes on to ask, Num etiam recentium injuriarum memoriam deponere posse. He responded that, even if he were willing to forget the historical issues, could he also set aside the memory of the recent violence? Here the question is rhetorical. Caesar is already suggesting that he obviously can't, nor does he really want to. And that's why we use the infinitive posse rather than a subjunctive. So the standard indirect question is introduced by an interrogative word, like asks, and begins with a question word with a verb in the subjunctive. When you're operating in indirect speech, you will find two different ways to relate questions. So real standard questions will have the verb in the subjunctive, while rhetorical questions use the infinitive. And sometimes whether the question is rhetorical or not depends solely on the opinion of the writer, which is to say that sometimes you'll see real questions relayed with an infinitive. And that's just because language can be messy. So rule number 88, in indirect speech, a real question has a verb in the subjunctive mood, while a rhetorical question uses an infinitive.